When students will return to school is a bit of an open question. One thing that is certain, more and more students of color are being educated in Western Massachusetts. But when it comes to teachers and administrators, the vast majority are white. Ben James, a freelance journalist, explored how we got here and some ongoing efforts to make schools more diverse in a recent series for New England Public Radio, and he discussed his report with me.
Well, there's a pattern that's playing out in school districts across the state, and it came to my attention again and again where there are school superintendents and school leaders who are saying we really want more educators of color in our schools, and then a couple sentences later they say actually it's really hard to bring in more educators of color, and we try, and sometimes it's impossible even, and meanwhile you have community leaders, teachers, parents of school age children who are saying, what do you mean this is a priority if you can't actually, if you're having so few successes, if change is happening so slowly? And that pattern is playing out with variation across the state and really across the country. And witnessing that as a journalist as well as a father of school age children, I just got curious. I was like, I want to understand this better. So I wanted to know, is there really a shortage of teachers of color? If there is, what's causing it? What are the impacts for kids and for students of color as well as for white students? And are there districts that are succeeding, that are doing something to make things, to improve the situation?
Yeah, and you dug into answers to a lot of those questions in the three-part series that you did recently for New England Public Radio. Looking at specifically students of color, we're seeing more students of color at the being educated in our region. However, the teachers and administration, as you mentioned, who are educating these kids are the vast majority of them are white. What did your sources say about the impact of that?
I made it a real point to make sure I had a variety of sources. So it was really important for me to talk to administrators and teachers, of course, but I consider students experts on education, and so it was crucial to me to interview students as well, and so there's a different answer depending on who we're talking about. I mean, I would tend to start with the students and say, how are they identifying the impacts?
And one senior you talked to, his name was Jaden Perez, and he's an Hispanic student at Amherst, and he said this: there hasn't been any new people of color, male or female teachers, getting added into any of our core classes, which is really the big thing that affects if we pass high school or not. And that student spoke about a bias that they were subjected to in terms of grading. Did you hear that from other students as well?
I think there's a general sense that for students that I talked to in all three districts, which were Holyoke, Northampton, and Amherst, that they've had very few teachers of color throughout their entire schooling. So these are high school students who I interviewed for this story, and stretching back all the way to kindergarten, they could say, many of us said, I can count one or two teachers, that I've had who were black or brown teachers. And his point was, yes, Amherst is actually, there are more adults around who are people of color. There are more, I, and the district really is making an effort. And I think his point was that they're actually succeeding in some ways, but in this core way that matters, which is my academic classes, math, English, history, the ones that I get graded on that really decide what college I might go to, that those teachers are still predominantly white. And that affects me, as I'm speaking in his voice, as a student of color. That really affects my experience of how I connect with my teacher and what my success might look like in the class. So I do want to contextualize that comment because Amherst is probably one of the districts that's having the most success in bringing in more educators of color into the building. But his point was there's still a long way to go.
And so when you talked to the administration there and said, look, here's what one of your students said, here's what they're thinking and feeling, what did they say?
Yeah, so Amherst is really interesting. I would say that if there's, a curve of progress in terms of making real inroads into changing the situation, I would put Amherst at the front of that curve right now for our region. The the Amherst district has combined their human resources department with their diversity and equity department. It's one unit. It's run by Black and Latino administrators and staff entirely. And so going and interviewing them about this story was a real education for me in terms of one, the changes that they're truly making, but also um, their true willingness to identify problems that are going on in their district. And if I had to characterize what it was like to interview the other districts, I would say that there's more of a yes, we agree this is very much an issue. We kind of have it figured out. We're doing our best, that sort of stance. Whereas Amherst really is the first one to say this isn't working and we have to do something about it. Or at least the administrators that I spoke to in that department.
And certainly, this is a long-standing challenge. I think you interviewed someone who said that this has been an issue since 1997 when they were a student.
Right.
Do we have any sense of why the change is so slow to come here?
Harvard Kennedy School just released a story this winter. Released research this winter that identified the primary barrier to increasing the teacher of color workforce as being convincing college students that it's worthwhile to become teachers, to getting candidates into the pool to become certified as teachers. That's where, of course, there's all these other hurdles along the way. It's a systemic problem, but that was what they said was the main problem, was just getting young people at this point, college age people who want to become teachers. Why would a Black person or a Latino person who's gone through the school system choose this as what they want to do? It's the system is not working systemically for Black and Latino kids in the area.
And I know that you also looked at the Massachusetts Education Commissioner is looking at some of those just systemic issues that are getting in the way of getting these teachers, those people who do say, I'm interested in becoming a teacher. There's problems there, and even getting them certified to become teachers. And he's looking at some proposed changes to the system, right?
Absolutely. So it's called the teacher pipeline. And once you have people in the pipeline who are in training programs and such, there are further impediments. One is testing. One is the cost of testing. Is a real impediment for many people in continuing on. There are a lot of tests. You have to pay for each one individually. If you don't pass it, you have to pay for it again. One of the things that Commissioner Riley is trying to work with as a solution is getting to the point where candidates can pass teacher licensure tests based on their teaching experience and their teaching skills, and not purely on a point grade on a test, because what they're focused on is whether a teacher is working in the classroom, and they know that teachers of color can bring things to the classroom that a white teacher who's scoring terrifically on the test just can't bring.